you have the speech drop code in the chat?
Yep, got it. Thank you.
All right. Okay. The investor-owned utility model is failing in regulation as a loss clause. Flood 26. Confluence of conditions led the system to the breaking point. IOUs are monopolies tied to their capital. This creates incentive to overbuild, overpay, resist planning reforms without changing the incentive structure. Utility regulation consistently underperforms competition, is misaligned with coordination needs. Planning horizons returns to the accrued solely the 1990s left the U.S. restructured out electricity markets 20 years later, results mixed the landmark study across regions found stark disparities. Drivers for price increases come with how we build the grid and who pays for it, and thus the plan the United States federal government should substantially increase its public ownership of electric utilities by establishing a national power authority to construct, own, and operate transmission generation infrastructure. Federal control leverages public power, allowing for rapid modernization of the grid. Flood 26. Demands rapid modernization. Policymakers should leverage public power, national power authority model after TVA, develop, own, and operate generation and transmission infrastructure at the national scale. Grid trust fund model after the highway trust fund MP with access capital through treasury financing, eliminate shareholder hold authority, cutting through costs and state permitting tickets by stalled regional grid investment and build using federal rights of way, cut through backlogs. Texas demonstrated mission build out reduced electricity costs by 21 billion between 10 and 2022. MPA financed building and owning emerging clean capacity with high upfront costs, such as enhanced geothermal, grid scale storage, offshore wind, and nuclear power drive public investment, deliver baseload power the grid needs to while creating union jobs and political support for the reform of the energy sector is significant. Flood 26. Kreisler created rare alignment of constituencies, political terrain outright for coalitions to reorient the grid toward public planning investments. Public want the federal government with 60% of voters, one public sector lead on grid modernization. Only 20% think the state governments do a good job protecting consumers on utilities down from pure use. Or in case public trust is not state, the utility commission jobs and public institution planning. AI companies, investors, and industries not receive certain reliability and speed to meet their investment horizons, and massive expansions take less than a year. The AF crushes on time frame. Flood 26. Ensuring investments in the virtual plants, distributed energy resources, grid enhancing technologies, and conducting EVPs play a critical role in delivering capacity of 40% cost kits, optimized transmission and replacing existing aluminum conductors with carbon fiber, double capacity in 1 to 3 years gets dynamic line rating and power flow to play in 12 minutes or less, effective transmission capacity by 5 to 25% of federal program enabled solutions to the labor gap and the decarbonization advantage. First, the electricity backlog is high and proposed large-scale projects aren't being built. See Empoli 26. Backlog queues and lengthy approval process become a major bottleneck of slowing the build-out of generation supply needed to meet future load demand and grid reliability, energy affordability. Many projects that apply for interconnection will not ultimately be built, and the grid is the bottleneck. Without upgrading the grid, policies cannot solve warming, but not all 24. Shortage of transmission capacity poses risks to development financing, building generation, impeding new projects, especially renewable decarbonized generation. Project C and financing cannot secure until assurance of transmission along way and expensive upgrades mean most projects now reach commercial operations. Among all projects requesting interconnection between 2000 and 2018, 90% of service as of 2023 lower for solar and battery and warming is a prior question. Uncertainties in modeling mean any reduction in CO2 is necessary. Ripple all 26. Where warming would overshoot the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, the greater risk of feedbacks and tipping points could commit the plan to a hothouse trajectory, even if emissions are largely greatly reduced and large uncertainties. The 1.5 degrees Celsius limit was surpassed in 2024, underscores how rapidly climate change is advancing, amplifying feedbacks, heighten the risk of accelerated warming. Even moderate overshoot of feedback-driven emissions could shift the Earth towards a point of no return, and warming plausibly causes extinction, undermines adaptive capacity, risks system-wide failures as an impact multiplier akin by all 22. Climate change resulting in human extinction, ample reasons to suspect catastrophe. Climate change played a role in 5 mass extinction events occurred, and current carbon pulses occurring at unprecedented speed and may surpass thresholds that triggered previous mass extinctions. Cumulative impacts may overwhelm adaptive capacity, could trigger international conflict, system-wide synchronous failures. Climate change will undermine humanity's ability to recover from cataclysms such as nuclear war. Advantage 2 is resilience. First, the grid's current infrastructure makes it an easy target for cyber attacks. Con 26. U.S. grid faced the pressure from adversaries probing to disrupt power at the same time rapid adoption of AI, placing increasing demands, grid scale, and uneven defense make it target groups aligned with nation states play long lane till full type and objective wasn't damaged. It was to research and inform future attacks. Taking down 50 generators could start cascading outages across 30 states. About 10% of lines could trigger cascading failures. Risk grows when grid is the near maximum load, becoming common as AI infrastructure expands. And infrastructure resilience is the best response to deter cyber attacks. Vander Shift 25. Punishment and denial, these approaches still matter, but context has changed. Deterrence depends on resilience of a target's country's infrastructure. Deterrence by resilience is built on a country can throw a shock, adapt, and recover adversaries so less likely to believe they can achieve decisive results. Critical infrastructure as a strategic target. Power grids are exposed. Cyber attacks on an energy grid will not wait for approvals. Resilience should be built from the start. Too many systems are retrofitted for security. And a single widespread cyber attack risks societal collapse and conventional warfare. NAIC 17. A large-scale cyber attack on the U.S. grid, economic cost of 243 billion, small rise in the death, darkest scenarios envision scarcity of water and food, deterioration of sanitation, and breakdown in security, leading to societal collapse. American public demand a forceful response, reshape geopolitical interest, traditional military reaction is likely.
Okay, you ready?
Sure.
All right, will you be changing the infrastructure, like the generation infrastructure?
Yeah.
All right. How will Trump play a role in this plan, considering, he's the current prez?
Well, the AF is an act of Congress, which means that I think Trump is constrained, though there logically could be a like board of directors or something that sort of oversees the National Power Authority, in which case
Okay.
Trump will still be constrained, but he does
So is
have
that
the
like,
authority to appoint people.
okay, is that like what the NPA does? Like, can you tell me what
Mm,
exactly is the NPA?
So, if you want me to read like sort of directly from the flood evidence, which is the solvency advocate, the MPA would be modeled after the TVAs to develop, own and operate generation and transmission infrastructure. This entails creating a good trust fund, but it also would entail like cutting through permitting thickets, building on federal rights of way land, so public lands, and those sorts of things. But like essentially when it comes to like the private sector, the MPA would be providing recommendations and
Okay.
like goals that they have to meet when it comes to transmission infrastructure.
Okay.
Um,
What is your funding for this?
it's the Grid Trust Fund.
Okay, is that like just like a federal trust fund?
I mean, yeah, like in a simplified way, I can give you more like specific because there's three different funding streams. It's modeled after the Highway Trust Fund. The three revenue streams is an excise tax on large load electricity consumption, general fund transfers, and then co-investment from data center development. So like data center developers will have to pay for some of the electricity they will consume.
Okay. Um, and would this like decrease the profit motive for private companies?
Um, I feel like decrease is a little bit of a loaded term here, but it does alter the profit motive to make it to where it's put in better places, such as transmission infrastructure.
Okay. But so how much like control is the federal government going to have?
hmm Um, I mean, I guess that's sort of up for debate. Like, I think what I described in the solvency evidence is like what the plan is doing, and it's not really going to do much more than that and no less than that, right? So,
So
um,
where in there are you increasing public ownership?
Yeah, it's because it's a national power authority. So like the public ownership part is the government owning parts of the industry, but it's also like creating rules and regulations of the industry. It depends on how you define public ownership, which is a debate we can have, but
Okay. Well, that's time. Are you ready?
yep.
Yep.
Okay. T electric utilities. Interp. Electric utilities do not include the generation of electricity. Bendrick no date. Electric utilities are the companies that own and maintain utility poles and power lines. Utility companies are responsible for the physical delivery of electricity to your home or business. Violation. The affirmative National Power Authority changes the generation infrastructure. That's on topical. See flood 26. Standards. Bright line. The neg definition creates a fair and clear distinction between what is topical and what is untopical. Moving target. Untopical cases allow for shifting affirmative positions. Extra T. Interp. An affirmative may not do more than what the resolution calls for. Violation. Increasing public ownership and switching to renewables is extra topical. Standards. Extra topical cases explode the neg burden outside of the resolution by including untopical action in the AF plan, allowing the AF access to unlimited potential advantages. Voter. The AF either loses to extra T to prove an abuse or must concede their climate change advantage. Voters. Accessibility. The neg already is a massive research burden on the resolution with 4 independent topic areas. Granting the affirmative the more ground explodes the neg research burden, makes debate inaccessible to the neg. Inaccessibility in debate destroys the activity. Next, fairness. The only way to preserve fairness within debate is to vote against untopical cases. Otherwise, the resolution becomes obsolete, and the team wins by cheating rather than good argumentation. Allowing unfairness destroys the foundation of the debate. Next is the midterms, DA. Democrats win now, but nothing is decisive. Blake 26. Democrats have momentum in midterm. In order to take Senate, they need to do something extraordinary. Likely possibility requires significant swing. Winning within the realm of possibility doesn't mean everything is going Democrats. Democrats got Iowa, Montana in the matchup in Texas exactly what the Democratic Party wanted. Some recent high-quality polls have found Democrats with a double-digit lead. The data right now is pretty clear that Democrats winning control of the Senate is increasing on the table. Next, climate-friendly policies determine all future elections. Flips midterms by giving GOP 2 wins, 1 climate and 2 electricity prices. Hurwitz and Jones 25. Climate-friendly initiative and candidates winning nationwide voters will suggest Americans pushing back against Trump's efforts to roll back climate action. The election was a decisive rejection of Trump administration. Mamdani campaign garnered endorsement for youth climate organization. Georgia appointed concentration. Electricity prices were on the ballot. Climate-friendly policies will on the local scale to every election is climate election. Next, Democratic Senate is key to restraining Trump, solving his slew of existential threats. Jackson 25. Midterms last chance to stop Trump, restore checks and protect democracy. Dem stand at block damage, reverse actions across economy, environment, and alliances, rights, and the rule of law. Trump's brought a crisis. Extremism emboldened internationally, standing plummeted. Trump cozy to dictators, abandoning alliances, agreements on climate rights, democracy, and reputation under assault. Need checks. Congress's reigning president. Dem Senate was to rebalance. A new Congress correct president worked after Watergate 18. Hold the administration accountable. Pull country from brink. Congress can investigate and impeach Trump. Issues to be in as appropriate money, block initiatives, direct funding to health relief, rein in abuses. Majority in Senate can ensure unqualified nominees don't get rubber stamped into lifetime judgeships. Next is solvency. TVA just dropped renewables, proving the plan won't be insulated from industry pressures. Meyer and McCarthy 26. The Board 7 members unanimously dropped renewable energy priority and granted coal plants a reprieve. The changes will slow the TVA shift away from fossil fuels just as electricity demand is spiking, raising questions about federally owned utilities. Next is funding. Federal trusts don't guarantee reliable funding. Social Security proves. Bosia 24. The trust fund is more of a political construct than a true repository of savings or investments. The trust fund essentially consists of IOUs or promissory notes that represent claims on future tax revenues. Regardless, the trust fund balance when Social Security's annual expenses exceed its annual income, the government must either raise taxes, increase borrowing, or cut spending to fund promised benefits. Next, federal trust funds worsen the national debt. Bosia 24. The trust fund is a figurative penny bank that holds IOUs, not actual money. The government has never saved or invested in Social Security tax surplus. All benefits are paid by current tax collections or borrowing. The government must borrow $40.1 trillion, including associated interest costs between now and 2023 to pay for Social Security benefits. Trust fund is superficial cases to claim or to ensure 75-year solvency, but ultimately lead to larger deficits. Next, case turn. Debt destroys resilience to pandemics, terror, and financial crises. Mansion 21. The nation faces unprecedented challenges, inevitably encounter crises. Overheating, imposed inflation, tax debt has reached record levels, ignoring consequences, which creates a disastrous future. What if there's a financial crisis? What if we face a terrorist attack or conflict? Reducing what America spends to build a better, stronger nation. Next, on to the cyber advantage. Case term. Public renewables open the door to cyber attacks. Musla et al. 26. The transition to renewable dominated power systems is reshaping grid operation while introducing new cybersecurity risks and exposes critical vulnerabilities. Threats are shown to compromise system stability, reliability, and resilience. Cyber attacks on energy and power system evolve dramatically, posing significant risks to infrastructure. Alarming trends have been noted, increasing numbers and consequences of attack, increasing frequency of cyber attacks of renewable energy systems. The impact of these attacks on renewable energy infrastructure is profound. Attackers were able to pinpoint organizations with exposed devices and launch a synchronized campaign. With these systems utilizing public networks, they present a real threat. Next is the decarbonization advantage. Status quo solves. The renewable transition is happening now. Modi et al. 26. Despite shifts in federal energy policies, the U.S. transition to renewable energy is continuing. Solar, wind, and battery storage account for 90% of new capacity in 25, thanks to falling costs of renewable energy tech investments supported by the IRA and local state policies. While demand has been relatively flat, there have been major shifts in the source of electricity supply. Capacity additions from renewable energy have outpaced that of every other tech since 2011. Accelerating renewable energy build-out is increasingly viewed as an immediate, low-cost, and practical solution to meet demand growth. The fossil fuel share of U.S. power generation has fallen 15 percentage points. Rapid renewable energy build-out is occurring across states regardless of political allegiance. Factors driving the transition to renewables are now frequently transcending politics. This has contributed to a broader dispersion of solar and wind deployment across the U.S. Renewable energy advantages allow it to outcompete fossil fuel tech. Next, the transition survived Trump. Private companies prefer the cheaper option. Spectre 26. Trump's done everything in his power to undercut the propulsive growth of renewables, but clean energy construction has kept a ruling policy setbacks to be damned, raising the possibility that sheer strength of clean power tech will carry the U.S. forward in transition away from fossil fuels. Despite Trump, solar, wind power, and battery construction is on the track to burst through records at the end of the decade. The certainty of renewable growth through the 2020s derives of a tax policy quirk that benefits solar and wind developers. State legislators are getting better at clean energy permitting policy. Clean energy still beats fossil fuels in cost despite Trump's big beautiful law. Clean energy will avoid the worst-case scenario. Solar, wind, and batteries have years-long track record of being the expert prediction of how cheap they'll get. Next, no impact. Adaptation solves. The impact is slow. Massetti and Mendelssohn, 18. The empirical evidence indicates that adaptation will reduce the net damage of climate change. Climate change impact studies that assume no adaptation will greatly overestimate the future damage from climate change. Households and firms have adequate private incentives to adapt to climate change. Adaptations in climate change should be included as an additional benefit when considering market reforms in climate-sensitive sectors. Continue to adapt through human history. Adaptations reduce the harm they face from gradual climate change. And climate adaptation will be large, widespread, and highly effective. Effective adaptation is certainly more likely to occur than effective mitigation of climate change because mitigation requires global cooperation, which is difficult to organize. Adaptation can proceed using existing institutions at the local, state, and national levels, and institutions at each of these levels can help their constituents adapt.
Okay. You good for a cross?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, I want to start on the funding like case turn.
Mm-hmm.
You're comparing the Grid Trust Fund to Social Security. How is Social Security funded?
A federal trust fund, which since Flood said it was comparable to existing trust funds, we see that as a direct link.
Well, are all trust funds the same?
Um, the government is the same, and we see with the Social Security Trust Fund that the government doesn't always like in the second card that it worsens the national debt, that when they have a surplus of money, they just use it in other areas, and we would see that like same thing happen. And
Wait,
like
wait,
it's
wait, wait. I have a question. Is
yeah.
is Social Security legally required to give payouts to consumers?
Uh, can you rephrase that?
Is Social Security legally required to keep the trust fund like afloat and then to pay out money every month to like elderly people? Are they legally required to do so?
Yes? Question
Okay.
mark.
Okay. So then I guess the terminal you're going for is that debt is bad. Why is that like unique?
So the idea here is that there's two arguments being made. The first one is basically like a solvency argument saying that you cannot guarantee that this will be able to fund the plan because we've seen um when expenses like exceed how much they expect it to cost, they have to raise taxes, increase borrowing, or cut spending to fund promised benefits, like saying basically they might not do what you promise. And then the second argument is that it worsens the national debt because when it costs more than they expect it to or whatever, they'll have to pull from they'll have to borrow, and that worsens the debt.
Okay. Let's go to the cyber advantage. You're currently saying that public renewables open the door to cyber attacks. I'm curious where this evidence isolates like government owned infrastructure as like the key to cyber attacks.
So rather than saying like government owned, the last sentence specifically says when utilizing public networks. So like it's the concept that if you have it all on a public network, it's more accessible to cybersecurity. And then that paired with the fact that trends show that cyber attacks target renewable energy systems, like specifically means that like the affirmative putting it on a public network and forcing the switch to renewables is what actually causes the potential for cyber attacks and the impact.
Okay. I will take a little bit of prep here. Starting no.
All right. So whenever you're ready for the roadmap.
Yep. So it's going to be case with solvency, and then I think I have decarbonization, and then it's resiliency, and then topicality, and then the disadvantage. At the top of the solvency page, the grid's current model is failing prioritize profit over sustainability. Leveraging public power is key to rapidly modernizing the grid. It's popular among constituents and can happen in under a year. But let's go straight down the line by line. The first argument they make is that the TVA is shifting priorities, but the TVA didn't shift priorities. High cost constraints caused that, and 1NC Myers McCarthy 26 evidence essentially concedes this. Board citing energy affordability, reliable electricity help communities thrive, and the AF makes energy prices decrease, so Republicans wouldn't need to nor have an excuse to gut renewable energy after the act is passed. But the next argument is about the trust fund. We have a few answers here. First is that there's three revenue streams from the affirmative. As excise tax on large load electricity consumption, which is workable because Virginia approves. GT in 26 says Virginia approved first of its kind tax on data centers beginning on July 1st of 2026. But next is it also uses general fund transfers as well as co-investment from AI companies. This generates roughly $175 billion over 10 years, and there's no like sort of statute within the flood evidence that says we're going to go into debt or that we're even allowed to go into debt after the affirmative is passed. But Social Security is structurally different because it uses different tax bases and mechanisms. It also doesn't increase debts. That's not how Social Security works. The projection was from the CBO about like what would happen if Congress doesn't continue funding the trust fund. That's completely different than whether or not the trust fund with its current tax base actually solves something, which means that there's no impact they can go for, and it's terminally non-unique to think that debt is actually going to lead to a huge impact since the US has the most debt out of any other country in the world, and that continues to increase by trillions of dollars a year. Let's go advantage one. An electricity backlog is preventing the build of transmission projects. That's the bottleneck. The decking assurances needed to commercialize renewable energy. Warming is a prior question because of the uncertainty of feedback loops and that plausibly causes extinction. They say that renewables are currently being invested now. We have three responses. One is the backlog exists now, meaning its power is not being unleashed through different regions within the US, which means that some areas might have renewable investment, but others obviously don't. But second is they don't make up a large percentage of the total energy build out that currently exists in the US. We're still relying on fossil fuels, which is the top of the 1AC and the Advantage 1. That's a reason that you should be prioritizing renewables now because it's the only way to prevent extinction. And the argument is defensive at best. We don't have to prove that renewable energy doesn't currently exist. We just have to prove that the app makes it more. So you're not giving the solvency deficit that Trump is going to deck the ability of to create renewable build out on the federal level. The executive already controls energy policy. The FERC commissioners, DOE leadership are all presidentially appointed. It means it's try or die for the affirmative. Even if politics sometimes stalls progress, and Trump will always be constrained by Congress. APPA 26. Every proposal to sell the PMUs or TV has not been met with resounding opposition in Congress. Trump proposed PMA and divestment all four of his budget requests in TV, divestment in three of his budget requests in the first term. However, Trump was not proposed to sell the PMUs or TV in his budget request in his second term. And there's no reason that you can claim that climate change doesn't cause extinction. We specifically have the ripple evidence to preempt any previous studies that are conducted on climate change because they don't assume tipping points, and tipping points are the key accelerant of climate change because it creates this feedback loops where we sort of have a recursive cycle of emissions that will cause climate change to be existential. They don't contest this. Go to the second advantage. The grid's infrastructure is being pushed to its limit due to AI and renewable energy, resulting in vulnerabilities. Modernizing the grid is the best response to the resulting cyber attacks. A large cyber attack could collapse society and risk conventional warfare. In response to the renewables being vulnerable, private ownership of critical infrastructure actually causes more cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Roger 24. The private sector owns 85% of critical infrastructure and imposes cybersecurity hurdles with different regulatory rigor with the public sector. Prioritization problem over security risk. The division between ownership of utilities is a sticking point, and the negative evidence assumes the status quo. The when you see Con 26 evidence says new vulnerabilities risk cascading failures because the grid operates near maximum load due to AI and renewables. The app introduces redundancy to prevent widespread damages and unlock backlog energy, meaning modernizing the grid is how we close vulnerabilities, but it also misunderstands the public network argument. Like when we were talking about the public network during cross-examination, that's about Wi-Fi. I work in IT. I promise I know what I'm talking about here. When it says public network, it's not just unique to the federal government or government institutions. It's just networks that don't have a passcode associated with them. But let's go to the T argument. I meet their interpretation. The NF is modeled after the TVA, which prides itself as a publicly owned utility, and contesting that is illogical because that's how it passed the regional governments in the area. But also, plain text in a vacuum says electric utilities, which means that I only have to prove up to the plain text. But in counter interpretation, utilities own and operate the grid and can be publicly owned. Tucker 22. Deliver electricity to customers, secure power from generation resources. In some cases, utilities own the plants to distribute electricity power. They own and operate transmission, distribution, utility poles, sell that power to customers. Investor-owned utilities, publicly owned utilities, member owner cooperative utilities prefer one over limiting the neg decks core topic leadership, preventing fruitful debate by excluding discussion about communities without substantial generation infrastructure, electricity needed for decarbonization, and more. The 1 and C doesn't outline what is and isn't topical. 2, ground they're actively clashing, have access to community cooperative counterplans, privatization, counterplans, cybersecurity turns, DAs, federalism, and more turns their offense because they're arbitrarily skewing themselves by excluding such offense reasonability. Competing interests creates a race to the bottom. Good is good enough. Bright line, Takamura is better. It's more specific and outlines different types of utilities. Voters won the round will be lost in the cacophony. 2, research burden doesn't matter for year-long competition and cross-team collaboration. 3, fairness is inherently non-unique and hard debate is good debate that answers their voters level. And go to midterms. Go to uniqueness. We're going to read the Galston 6-8 evidence. Iran matters more. Approval of Trump performance has defined the war has accelerated the drop. President's level of public support will significantly improves the outcome of midterm elections. And that's time. All right. So just for clarification, the card that was read on midterms was the Galston 6-8 evidence, and then everything else you can delete.
Let's get my timer. Okay, is everyone ready? I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay, starting off on topicality, we can concede that generation counts as an electric utility, but they did not respond to our extra topicality, which is an automatic negative ballot. We said an affirmative may not do more than what the resolution calls for, and increasing public ownership and switching to renewables is extra topical. Your voter here was that the AF either loses to extra topicality to prove an abuse or must concede their climate change advantage. Since they didn't respond to this, we know that they didn't concede their advantage, meaning they auto lose to extra topicality with a lack of an a response to our violation and a response to our standards or voters. This means that they can see that their case is extra topical, which we can see in their funding mechanism, in their change for the in their switch to renewables. Rather than just increasing public ownership, they're also creating an entirely different funding mechanism that also functions in these hyper-specific different ways that also changes the grid to renewables. They're doing way more than what the resolution calls for, and they admit that by conceding this. Don't let them respond in their next speech. This response should have been in their constructive when I could have then responded to it in this speech. This argument alone wins the negative ballot. But moving on to case. First, private companies are transitioning because of the profit motive. Durley 26. Fossil fuels, which powered the global growth of the 20th century, are giving way to a new generation of clean green technologies. In today's economy, you find entrepreneurs, engineers, and executives at stake billions of dollars of capital in the conviction that clean energy is better for business. Next, private companies are solving. Look at Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs acquires RWE's U.S. distributed clean energy business. Surging power demand and grid decentralization are driving unprecedented demand for localized renewable energy. This acquisition represents a compelling opportunity to build a market-leading distributed generation platform and a pivotal movement for U.S. power infrastructure. Goldman Sachs Alternatives are well-positioned to deliver critical clean energy capacity to communities and businesses across the country. This transaction will support utility-scale power businesses in the U.S. with the company investing in energy solutions to meet rapidly growing demand for reliable and affordable electricity in the U.S. The affirmative tries to say that it doesn't matter if the transition's already happening now, as long as they can prove that the affirmative is net better. And we say that because the affirmative would de-incentivize the profit motive by making it owned by the federal government to a higher degree because they claim to be increasing public ownership, that means that private companies are then going to be deterred. And we see that in the midterms DA, but in terms of this, we see the status quo can solve alone without the affirmative plan. The question is just whether or not the affirmative plan is a little bit better or just has risks, which we do see via the midterms DA, which we'll move to now. They say that Democrats aren't actually going to win and the Republicans lead. We see Democrats win now. Most recent polls. Our evidence assumes redistricting. Rego 614. Democrats hold 5-point edge over GOP. 2,400 registered respondents wanted Democrats to win back control of Congress. Margin of error of 2 percentage points. Democrats optimistic about chances in Alaska and Texas races despite the CPR rating as GOP leads. Next, Republican control turns Congress into a rubber stamp for Trump. Goldwyn 26. Early in March, senators gathered to take a vote meant to remind President Donald Trump of Congress's power. Madison never imagined or envisioned a Congress with no ambition. This is a Congress without ambition. This is a Congress without really a belief structure in defending legislative prerogative. They are just a rubber stamp for whatever president tells them to do. The vote was merely a latest capitulation of a GOP-controlled Congress that subordinated itself to the executive power branch headed by Trump. While lawmakers once jealously guarded their constitutionally endowed power over spending, trade, war, regularly checking the executive, Republicans of the 119th Congress have cast themselves as helpmeets to the president. Instead, I have no intention of getting in the way of President Trump and his administration. House Speaker Mike Johnson, our Louisiana, said in late January. Asked if he would work with Congress to enact tariffs, Trump said, "I don't have to." The only response that the affirmative was able to give to the midterms DA is saying that the Republicans were leading now and that Congress would keep Trump in check. All of our evidence points to the very opposite. We see right now Democrats are going to win, but if the affirmative is passed, it will sway to the Republicans because it's not the Republicans winning, but the Republicans could be close. So the only risk we have in terms of passing the affirmative is making the Republicans win. And since the affirmative wants to claim that Congress will keep them in check, we can look to Goodwin 26 to prove that they won't. They have literally admitted to doing whatever Trump wants. They are a rubber stamp of just stamping okays on whatever Trump asks them to do. And we've seen this throughout his whole presidency, and we would continue to see it. And the only risk we see here is the escalation to multiple extinction impacts, as we saw in the original midterms to say, let's see, solving a slew of existential threats. So that's Jackson 25, how extremism is emboldened internationally, standing plummeted like Trump cozies to dictators. The only thing passing the affirmative would do is risk this impact. And since the affirmative did not get to a link defense or an impact defense, both my link and impact still stand, proving that we will see existential threats from Trump remaining president because the Republicans would be voted in if the affirmative were to pass, since climate action is the number one priority of voters right now. So right now we see we can either vote on topicality, since they see an auto neg ballot in extra topicality if you want to look towards stock issues, or if we want to look at world building, we can see how the status quo actually solves the issues now because of the private motive or the profit motive, and how private companies are already transitioning. And the only risk is by passing the affirmative and triggering the DA. Because of these reasons, you will be voting negative. Thank you.
Okay, 2 minutes. So for the order, it's going to be T case with solvency, advantage 1, advantage 2, and then midterms. And if no one stops me, I will begin. Or sorry, real quick, there is actually a card. At the top of topicality, conceding the interpretation functionally means they lose the ballot because my interpretation says that I'm not extra topical because electric utilities can also own the generation resources. This is outlined in the card directly because let's see, where is it in the card? The utilities deliver electricity to customers from power generation resources. In some cases, utilities own the plants. This functionally means that there is no extra topicality ballot they can go for because they concede the interpretation. But also, the Grid Trust Fund is an extra topical because it's a funding mechanism, which is normal means. Go to case. On the case flow, go ahead and extend solvency, which goes conceded. They are conceding that the Grid Trust Fund and the NPA get created, and that solves a slew of threats, including blackouts. They don't address advantage 2, which means that the concession is going to be weighed against the disad in every world. The only contestation is on advantage 1 about decarbonization, but they don't really get into the link chain about why decarbonization occurs, which means you're always going to give the F on the likelihood of the F solving due to the specificity of the link chain, but in response to the only argument they make, which is like the Darley evidence, it doesn't say the profit motive actually leads to anything. It just says that there's billions of dollars of investment in renewables. The app says, it says that there's currently poor investment or poor incentive structures that are causing a lack of transmission infrastructure. That is what you're voting on, because even if there is investment in renewables without generation infrastructure, it does not matter. That is what the app is saying, and that's the key internal link to climate change, which goes uncontested, since they don't extend climate defense, which means that's an existential impact you can weigh in your calculus, but the conceding advantage too means that those come in combination, go to midterms. I didn't read that the Republicans win in the 1AR. I read that Iran thumps it because it makes Trump inherently unlikely. Galston 26 says Trump directly affects some Republican midterm ratings. This is uniquely key. Let's go ahead and extend it. The other issues. Wait, did I read the wrong card? Skip the Deneen evidence. The Allen evidence says Iran raising gas prices matters more to voters. That is from 625. Price of the pump are key indicator. Voters, Republicans stress about gasoline prices spikes. The party in power benefits when gas prices go down. Face of political risk when pain at the pump is more prevalent. Voters' memories of pain at the pump tried to war may persist. Gas prices also can go up. That is gas prices because of Iran, which means that thumps the likelihood that Republicans are ever going to win. This goes uncontested. There is no impact that they can go for because we thump the link chain, but there's no impact calculus at the bottom of the disk. That is really bad for them because they conceded conflict because of blackouts will always outweigh. It happens faster and could happen after the round, which means that at best the app's impacts or at minimum the app's impacts happen quicker, but at best you're going to be evaluating climate change and conflict over just a single conflict impact. BOF.